start off by giving me your stance on school choice?
Well, we've looked at some school choice bills over the last couple of years, and I have spoken with lots of legislators about those bills. And I'm always real careful. I don't want to talk about bills that haven't been introduced, but when we look at the bills in the past, certainly we know this year the governor's talked about bringing a school choice bill of her own, and those conversations are still ongoing. But what I can talk about, of course, are the things that have happened in the past. One of the things that we want to make sure is that any bill that's proposed has some accountability built into it, has some transparency built into it. I really, talking to my colleagues in other states, see that it's easier for the state to monitor if the money's sent, say, to a school rather than to a parent. And those are two very different models that we see in many states. So if the money is sent to a private school, an independent school, then the state has a little more control because they're going to be dealing with a set number of entities. That might be 50, it might be 100, 150, 250 schools that opt into the program. If you mail a check directly to parents, then you could end up mailing out thousands of checks. And as I, again, talk to my colleagues in other states, they say, it's always easier to deal with an established institution than it is to try to find parents. They may move, and you're trying to follow people around and chase them down after the fact. We want to make sure that all children, whether they go to public school or independent school or they're homeschooled, get a high-quality education. And we certainly are not in the business and don't want to be in the business of regulating homeschools or looking at what curriculum parents are using at home. That's clearly their business, and it's their business under Alabama law. But at the same time, we do want to make sure that anybody who is going to an independent school, they are going to a homeschool, that they're getting a really good, legitimate education. We have a lot of really good private schools in this state. I work well with the private school associations and several of the private school headmasters, and I have worked on projects together, especially during COVID. But we do know that we've had occasions in the state where a school would pop up like in a storefront business. Parents would send their kids there, they send money. A few months later, the school shuts down, the parents are out their money, they can't get school records, and believe it or not, we actually get calls from parents with situations like that every year, 2 or 3 times a year usually. And so we want to make sure that parents and the state of Alabama don't lose money in a situation like that. So that's why there needs to be some transparency and accountability, and as I talk to legislators, I hear many of them sharing those same concerns.
And when you talk about accountability, are we also talking about testing to ensure that students are staying on a good level?
Yeah, I would certainly look at some sort of testing. We've talked about that. I have been asked by legislators, not this year, but in past years, about whether students that opted out of the public schools could still take the official state test, and what the cost of that would be if we expanded that. That's something we're always open to. That's certainly not something that most of our independent schools, I think, not something they've asked for, let's put it that way. Some of them might want to do that. We certainly could make that available to them, could make that free for them if they wanted to. I know that some lawmakers are looking at other assessments that are out there, but it makes sense. Parents want to know where their students are. They want to know how the school their children go to, how they're doing. We're very open in public schools. We give a lot of tests. Many would argue we give too many tests, actually. But we report all those numbers back out in reading, English language arts, mathematics, and science in grades 2 through 8, and then again in high school. So we believe in reporting tests. I'm not going to sit here and talk about whether we give too many tests, because I do have a lot of people who are saying, can we cut back on what we do? But I will say this, the tests we give, we want to make sure parents see those results and they know how their children are doing and how their schools are doing.
And part of the conversation, you mentioned Governor Kay Ivey. She expressed support for education savings account type bill, one that is effective as well as sustainable for our states. There's been some concern about the impact on the Education Trust Fund for public schools do you have any concern related to funding for public schools if that education savings account were to come up?
Well, again, it's hard to speak about a bill that has not been filed, it's not been passed. As far as Governor Kay Ivey, I can assure you she's not going to introduce anything that has a long-term detriment to the Education Trust Fund or to the state of Alabama. She's smart, she's a former educator, she knows what she's doing, and she's going to make sure that anything that's introduced is fair to all concerned, and more importantly, that it's sustainable. So again, I'm not in that realm of writing a bill, being involved in that, but I know her well enough to know that she's not going to introduce something that would not be very responsible for the state to sustain long term. Certainly, many states now, more than a couple of dozen, have passed ESAs and voucher programs. None of those states have bankrupted their school system. So there are ways you have to design it to make sure that you have sustainability long term, but that's very doable.
Yeah, and for some people or some lawmakers who are proposing or may propose or proposed in previous years, wide sweeping universal savings account programs that would have taken, I believe last year the Price Act was around $650 million once it was fully implemented. Do you think that programs like that, universal programs, could impact public schools and funding for public schools?
We certainly have to look at what the limits are going to be, and the Price Act was one that I was not in favor of. I talked to the sponsor, Senator Stutz, about that at the time, had a great conversation. I understand where he's coming from and where he wanted to go with that bill. My concerns were that there were not enough guardrails around it for that very reason, that you have to look at long-term sustainability. We have to be able to do budget planning. We have to be able to think about what's this going to look like down the road. So some of those things, as you know, came up in that bill, discussions about things like field trips. So what is a field trip, and can a field trip be paid for with the voucher funds, or would the field trip have to be paid for with separate funds, and those kind of things. So I think those are conversations that legislators have to have, but before something passes both bodies, it's got to have a lot of debate. You got to look at those things and say, what are we really after here? Is it about educational experiences, or is it about travel and other kinds of experiences? Now, I'm not against travel. I'm not against kids going to Disney World. I've taken my own kids to Disney World, but the state of Alabama didn't pay for that. So I think we have to be really careful that we don't open the parameters too wide, and then it could get so expensive that it became really difficult to sustain, and might lead later then to a demand for increased taxes to sustain the program. And I don't think anybody wants that. I think you will probably see a lot of debate around that this year. And in fact, already legislators are talking to one another about what do we want this to look like if there is going to be a school choice bill. How do we make sure that we also protect our public schools? Now, even in states where school choice bills have passed years ago, most of them maintain about 90% of their kids in public schools, and that's where Alabama is. 90% of our kids go to public schools. About another 7-8% go to independent schools, and then a small group are homeschooled. So we don't see those numbers changing dramatically. I think they could change some. You certainly could see some families who might be right on the edge of saying, we can almost afford to go to a private school. We've identified a school we want to go to, maybe a church school, a parochial school, and we just need some more money. And so if the state stepped in, some of those families would probably opt to do that. But all in all, looking at other states' experiences, not a lot of people leave the public school system even when they have a voucher type system. So we don't think it would be a lot. To your point, if there was a bill that passed that had absolutely no guardrails, no accountability, and parents could use the money for related expenses like buying new computers, taking vacations and those kind of things, and that certainly could get very expensive very quickly.
Yeah, of course. And Governor Ivey has been working on a bill. I talked with her office yesterday, perhaps speaking about it before the session starts at her State of the State address. Have you been working with her on that bill in any way? Asking questions, conversations between each other?
So we're providing all the information she and her office need as they develop the bill. The actual drafting of the bill, no, we are not involved in that in any way. That's a good thing. I know she's got us. I think I can say, I don't want to speak for her certainly, but she understands we're dealing with the 750,000 kids in our public schools every day, and we need to stay focused on that work. But as they have questions about, we need these numbers, we need to look at this or that, whether it's related to this bill or any bill that they're looking at, we always provide those. So certainly I know she has the best interest of every child in this state at heart. Public school kids, private school kids, homeschool kids, kids that are not yet born, and kids after they graduate. She makes that very clear. She wants every child to have a pathway to success, and I think this is just part of her plan to make sure that happens for all children.
And what can be done, for Alabama public schools moving forward to ensure that people, parents, and want to keep their children in public school? What can we do to continue elevating Alabama
Absolutely.
public schools?
Yeah, very good question. So one thing, we know that our public schools right now are doing really well. We're doing better than we have in a long time. The latest NAEP results showed that we had not lost any ground in mathematics and had gained ground. One of only 6 states that had actually picked up ground in reading even through the pandemic. So we feel really good about that. We'll get new results. About a year from now, we'll get additional NAEP results, and we'll see if we're able to maintain that steam. But the reason for that is because as a state, we have recommitted ourselves to 2 basic things, and that is that every child reads on grade level and reads as much as possible. We want children reading above grade level, obviously, and that every child is proficient in mathematics. So we're really committed to those 2 goals. And then the related goal is, on the other end of school, that all children graduate with a college or career-ready credential. So we know when they leave high school, they've demonstrated readiness for college, the military, the workforce. So we're committed. Those are our 3 big things. We need communities and parents to jump on board and get behind those things. One of the most successful ventures we have undertaken as a state is coaching. We've gone deep into coaching model for reading, and it's shown great results. And just this year, the legislature funded and we implemented about 250 mathematics coaches in our most needy schools, or the schools that were showing the most need in mathematics. But you know what? We had actually taken federal funds through ESSER and funded a pilot program for mathematics. And already, about 3 years into that, we see that most of the schools that had a math coach for 3 sustained years have shown remarkable growth. And those data are not ready to be released publicly yet, but they'll be coming out soon. But already we see that it works. So in other words, we got good teachers who are working hard, doing the best they can, but sometimes they need additional coaching too. Everybody gets a coach, okay? We got our 2 biggest colleges in the state. They got big coaching staffs to work with some of the most phenomenal and talented athletes in the world. So they're already getting the best, but they have to still coach those folks. You go into the pros, they're still coaching people. And so in education, we've not done that most of the history of education, but we need to do that. We have to continue to help teachers build their skills. We're seeing remarkable growth from that. We have to continue to invest in it and make sure we have high quality math and reading coaches in every elementary school in the state, and that is certainly the governor's goal, and she has a plan to have that in place well before the end of this decade. Another thing we have to do is make sure we have really high quality principals. Now, I was a school principal. I can tell you it's really hard work. It's difficult each and every day. It's a high stress job, and we have to have principals that are willing to do the work, that understand academic rigor, and also have the skill to deal with parents and to deal with teachers and to deal with students. And there's just so many personalities involved in a school. You have to deal with all that, but you also have to deal with the academics. You have to be focused on making sure children are learning and doing better. So this last year, the legislature passed an unprecedented, first ever in Alabama, School Leadership Act that will allow us to put every principal through a principal's academy between now and the end of the decade. It'll take some time to get all of our principals through that, but that's going to be, we're going to see great growth in that. I know people don't want to hear talking about the future, but I can tell you if we continue the plans that we're on, the 2030s are going to be the best decade in Alabama's history. Now, that's a long time off, and so people say, well, yeah, but what are you doing about the students in school today? Well, we're doing that today. It's just that it takes time to build it out for every school, for every person involved over the time frame. And of course, students are in school for 13 years, so you don't turn things around in a child's life overnight. You have to build that knowledge over the years. But we're already seeing remarkable growth because of these investments. And then one other thing I would have to say is what we need from parents is to be involved with their children at a very early age. And I know that you're talking to me about K-12 schools, but I have to talk to our partners in early childhood all the time. They're great partners because they are focused on those children from birth to 5, but that really is where you win or lose the battle for a child's learning. The brain is almost fully developed before a child ever comes to school. And so if they are behind developmentally, we spend almost the rest of their school career helping them catch up and try to keep up. We need children to be read to every single day. From the day they are born until they start school, children need to be read to and read with. We need parents to notify the school if they see that their child might be behind, work with their doctor's office, whatever it takes. But if children do have developmental delays, the earlier we identify those, the better we can intervene and get those children back on track. Not waiting until they're 5 years old and they get to school. It can be 2 and 3 years old where we intervene with those kind of developmental delays. So we need the whole community to jump in, churches, parents, grandparents, and make sure that children are read to and children are ready to enter school.
And going back to this legislative session, the upcoming session, if a school choice bill were to come up, what are 5 things that you would need to see to be comfortable with that bill?
5 things.
Or
Well, I'm
3
gonna come up.
things,
Yeah. We'll come up with some. I got it. Well, if a school choice bill is introduced, one of the things we want to see is that there is some sort of cap on how much money it would take out of the Education Trust Fund, at least in the first year. We do currently have a school choice bill. It's a little bit smaller. It started out with about a $30 million cap. I think it is edged up, and I think it would eventually cap out at about $70 million now. So I think that one of the things we'd want to see is that there is an initial cap on any bill that's proposed, and if that cap's going to go up, that there's some kind of regular algorithm applied for, so there'd be some predictability about how it's going to affect the budget in the future. Not that we cannot afford it, but that we can budget for it. We want to make sure that there's transparency. Again, I think it would be better for any funds to flow to a school or an institution rather than to just sending out debit cards or something to parents, as a few states have experimented with. Most of them have seen real problems with that. So I think we want some transparency there, some accountability for the funds, and then there has to be some kind of relationship for what the school is. So in other words, an accreditation process. People have said, are you saying, I've said that before, and people have asked me, well, are you saying the State Department of Education should accredit schools? No, we do not accredit schools, and we do not want in the business of school accreditation. But something that says there's an outside body that has looked at this institution and said, hey, they've got their books in order, they've got their education in order, and they're able to move forward. And then certainly, child safety is really important to us. In our public schools and the vast majority of our independent schools too, teachers and adults that work with children have to undergo background checks. I think there needs to be some sort of background assistance for any school not homeschool, obviously, parents who are dealing with their own children. But if you're dealing with children who are not your children, there needs to be some kind of background safeguard to make sure that we're sending children into safe places. So those are just kind of some of the basics. When we see a bill, you know, as the bills in the past, I've been glad to interact with the sponsors, to talk about those bills. I've talked publicly in committee before, so my thoughts and views are not private. But it's hard to make comments on bills you haven't seen yet, and I have not seen a single bill. What I have been doing is reading bills from other states. So we've dove deeply into the bill that Utah passed last year. We've gone deep into looking at what Arizona has done, what Indiana has done. So some of the other states around, we have looked at. Florida's another state. We've looked at their bills because we think some of those same elements will probably be used in development of bills that we'll see filed here in Alabama. And then we've also looked at the bills that were filed last year. So Representative Danny Garrett filed a bill last year that didn't make it through, but we looked at that last year, and I've pulled it back out. I've had some conversations with him about that bill and the way it's structured. And so we've looked at those kinds of things also and getting ready so we can answer questions when the session does start.
And you're talking about the Alabama Fits All program.
That is, the Alabama Fits All program, yes.
I talked with Terry Collins about it yesterday. So.
Oh, yeah.